Okay, we're ready.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this budget forum. I hope everyone is doing well at what we know is a challenging semester for all of us. I'll offer just a few brief introductory comments here, and then I'll turn the program over to Vice President Michelle Halstead, who will share her screen and speak to you about our current budget and some of our budget challenges. And then we'll open it up for your questions and comments that we'll respond to, primarily Vice President Halstead, but also Provost Lyman and I are available as well. And I think when we reach that stage, Mike McInerney will unhost people one by one to hear your questions. So as I shared in my last monthly report, our goals here today are to help everyone understand several key points. One is our current budget, including the importance of all budget thinking, all funds budget thinking. Vice President Halstead will also talk about actions that we've taken to date to reduce expenditures and why it's virtually certain that we'll need to do more. She'll also share some of the continuing uncertainties that we don't expect to know more about until after the November election. And those uncertainties include enrollment and tuition revenue for the coming spring semester and beyond that, Board of Trustees actions on tuition rates, what our direct taxpayer support will be, maybe more to the point, how deep cuts to our direct taxpayer support will be, and finally, the outcome of potential federal stimulus funding, which if you're paying attention to the national conversation, you know, is like watching a ping pong match. Vice President Halstead will explain that we ran balanced budgets for several years. And then beginning in 2016, we began to experience a structural budget deficit when the tuition rate was held flat for the first time in 5 years, but expenses continued to grow. And that deficit grew to about $5 million by 2019. We were making really good progress on a 3-year plan to close that gap by reducing expenditures, by planned growth in enrollment, and by cautious use of campus reserve funds. Then COVID-19 came along, and our financial picture has changed dramatically since then. I want to be sure that we're all aware that the budget challenges that we face and the steps that we have to take are very different than the belt tightening that we've kept you apprised of these past few years. I'll comment here also that there's probably not a lot of value for us to speak today about the process and the approaches that we'll have to consider using to address our financial situation. Those will become clearer when some of the uncertainties that I've noted are clarified for us, and when campuses receive guidelines or directives from SUNY about how we're to approach these challenges. But no matter what procedures and processes we use, I want to assure everyone that we'll rely on some of the same values and approaches that we used in 2008 and 9, in 2010 and 11, when we took major budget cuts. That will include soliciting your ideas, hearing your concerns, communicating openly and honestly to share information and our progress. So with that brief introduction, I'll turn things over to Vice President Michelle Halstead. I hope. Michelle, you're muted.
As I was saying, my computer has decided to not play along with me today. It just booted me out, and so hopefully I'll be able to share my screen here in a second. Good afternoon, everybody. Please stand by. I feel like I'm piloting a plane rather than doing a budget forum with these headphones on, so sorry. Okay. It might be coming. Don, would you sing us a song while we're waiting for my computer to boot up here? You're muted. That's not fair.
I've been clear with this community before that I don't sing in public.
Okay. So my share doesn't seem to be wanting to work. Yeah, that's not cool. Uh-oh. And am I frozen? Lauren, am I frozen? Okay.
It's saying starting to share content, so
Oh,
maybe it's
yay!
working. Yay.
Can you see it?
Not yet, but
Okay.
If that doesn't work, I can load it
Yep.
up.
Let me
There.
know.
there
Okay.
it is.
Woohoo! All right, here we go, folks. So sorry. So I'm going to attempt to do in about 30 minutes what it's taken me 30 years to learn. So I'm going to be going kind of rapid fire today. The PowerPoint and the recording of this will be available afterwards for you to review. And as always, I'm available for questions via email, phone call, whatever. All right, so what I want to start out with is we have a really complex budget structure here on campus. We always talk about our core operating budget, and as you'll see in some of the slides coming up, why we always talk about the core operating budget, because it is our largest fund. But we actually have several funds on campus that we manage, and it's important now during the time of the pandemic to bring to light all of the overall fiscal health of the institution. So I will be also throwing a lot of acronyms your way today. We have created a budget jargon document that you can see the link right here. That'll take you to my new Paltz and give you some definitions for some of the acronyms that I might share and might not fully explain. All right, so we're going to talk about some buckets. We have several different funds, as I said before, and each bucket of funding has a different revenue source and a different purpose on campus. So we'll start at the top left of your screen with the core operating budget. That's the one that we talk about all the time. The core operating budget, the revenues that go into this budget consists of tuition, state taxpayer support, the direct state taxpayer support that we receive through SUNY. Students pay a college fee, and we also get some interest on the funds that are in that account or in that fund. That fund is about $70 million this year. Now moving to the right on the top of your screen, is the IFR, or the Income Fund Reimbursable. This is a bunch of smaller accounts and some larger accounts, probably about 100 in total, that make up about $15 million worth of revenue on the campus. This revenue comes from things like our broad-based fees, which are technology fee, athletics fee, and health fee. Course fees, so if a student takes a painting and drawing class, they might have a fee attached to their course. That helps us pay for the brushes and the paints and the easels and such. There are some user fees. Everybody's favorite user fee is the parking fee. And some rentals. If we rent out our facilities to outside entities, they pay us a rental fee, and we capture that in the income fund reimbursable. Sliding over to the right, academic affairs folks are probably very familiar with Sutra. Sutra is the State University Tuition Reimbursable Account fund, and it's comprised of non-academic year tuition, so summer and winter. In addition, we have some contract courses. By and large, those are in the School of Education. We have our overseas academic programs where our students go abroad, and we also now have a semi-new revenue share for new programs that come in. Those dollars that are derived from the tuition get shared amongst the academic departments and the deans and provost's office to manage those funds. That fund runs about $3.5 million per year, and it also is a bunch of individual accounts, probably about 30 or 40. Then go diagonally down to your left, the Residence Hall Fund. Now, this is our other big bad boy in SUNY funding. This fund collects about $26 million a year. The only source of revenue that goes into this fund is our room rents that are paid by our students who inhabit or occupy our residence halls. Next up, we have the Residence Hall IFR. The acronym for this one is DIFR-IFR, the Dormitory Income Fund Reimbursable. While it's fun to say, it's really a small account. And sorry, I just hit something on my screen and moved. Okay, so this fund is only $0.2 million, so $200,000 goes through this fund a year. It consists of dorm damages, lost keys, and actually we don't even issue our students keys anymore. And summer conference rent. So if summer conference comes in and uses our residence halls to house people overnight, we deposit those funds in there. So $0.2 million. Then lastly, we have our other fund. Now this fund you'll notice is in purple where the others are in green. That's because this is a pass-through fund. We collect all of the funds that are on this page through the Office of Student Accounts, generally through student bills, but there are some other ways that monies can get into these accounts. But by and large, it's through our student billing system. So the other fund consists of food service, student activity fees, and alumni fees. These are all fees that just pass right through. We do not record the expenditures on the campus accounting books, but we do take the revenue in. So if you add up all of the green funds, all of the funds that actually the campus does manage and accounts for the expenditures in, our all funds budget totals about 114.7, almost $115 million per year. Next, I'm going to try to show that graphically if my computer will play along with me. There we go. All right, so our all funds dollars, the core operating budget represents about 61% of our all funds, the residence halls almost 23%, IFR 13%, Sutra just 3%, and as I said, the residence hall IFR or the DIFR-IFR is a teeny tiny fund that represents 17% of our campus revenues for the year. Now, what comes out of each bucket? Going in the same line, same order as before. Core operating budget. Again, most of you are familiar with this. Core operating budget supports the faculty and staff salaries that support the academic mission. It's about 873 FTE. That's not headcount, but FTE. It supports the utilities for the academic and the administrative buildings, supplies, equipment, contracts, travel, all go into this, but by and large, it supports the people associated with the academic mission. In IFR land, the funds that we collect support the staff salaries that are related to the individual accounts. So I think the easiest one to portray here is the athletics fee. The athletics fee supports all of the coach and administrative and trainer salaries that are related to intercollegiate athletics and the athletic and wellness centers. In total, the IFR supports 57 FTE, and we also use those funds for supplies and equipment and very small amount of travel on anything but the athletic fee for the faculty and staff related to those purposes. So when you think about equipment related to the IFR, you can think about, again, the athletics fee. It supports the equipment in the gyms, the treadmills, and the other cardio equipment, and so on. Over in Sutraland, this supports faculty and staff salaries that support the summer and winter sessions. So think about the adjunct salaries and the portion of the faculty salaries that for the faculty who are teaching those summer and winter classes. A lot of the additional funds that are collected in this fund go to supports faculty development and startup funds, and some supplies, equipment, and travel as well, but not a heck of a lot in that fund. In the residence halls, it supports the funds collected, the $26 million collected here supports way more than just faculty and staff and supplies, contract, and equipment. In addition to those things, it supports utilities for just the residence halls, but the biggest single expenditure that comes out of these accounts are the bonds that pay for the renovations and creation of new residence halls. So this fund is kind of unique in that the capital funding that we normally get for our academic buildings doesn't support any of the renovation and creation of new buildings in this fund. Those bonds are actually issued solely for residence halls throughout the state of New York, and they are paid for solely by the rental revenues that we collect from our students. This fund supports 117 FTE on campus. The FTE that it supports are largely from facilities, health and safety, emergency management, UPD, and all of the residence life staff, including resident directors and resident assistants who are our students. There's funding supporting those folks in this fund. Again, the Residence Hall IFR is a very small fund. It just pays some supplies, equipment, and travel related to the dorm damages and other funds that are collected in that fund. And as I said before, the pass-through funds, we collect the funds through student accounts, and we just issue a check to the foundation, to CAS and Student Association to do the things related to those entities. So we don't record the expenditures, they do. Okay. So again, just wanted to graphically represent the people associated with these different funds and what they represent to our campus. So again, we talk about the core operating budget a lot because 82% of the people that work on this campus are supported by the core operating fund. And then 11% are paid for in the residence hall fund, 5% in the IFR, 2% in Sutra, and there are no people associated with the smallest residence hall IFR. So I talked a little bit about capital funds a second ago. It's always important to remind folks or to inform folks who might be new to campus that capital funds are primarily managed by the State University Construction Fund. The revenues associated with capital funds come from bonds that are issued by the state of New York and repaid by its taxpayers. These funds pay for the design and construction of new buildings on campus and also for major renovations. So things like roof repair, things that we've got going on campus right now. We did a nice little renovation over the summer of the lecture center. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's beautiful. The funds also pay for some furniture, fixtures, and equipment associated with those buildings. Generally, it doesn't pay for all of the technology associated with those buildings. And then once those buildings are built or renovated, all of the cost of operations are turned over to the campus. So the utilities and the refresh of any technology in the new engineering hub will be borne by the campus once those bills become due. And just a reminder, these funds can never be switched and used to pay for operating costs such as salaries on the campus. So that was my really fast, what I call the down and dirty lesson in all funds budgeting on campus. So let's talk about our current budget situation, but in order to do that, we're going to rewind and talk a little bit about last year. So for those of you who attended the budget forum last fiscal year in October, I think around this time, we mentioned that we started out the year with an anticipated shortfall in the core operating budget of $2.9 million. All of the other funds, the IFR, the Sutra, the residence hall budgets, they were all expected to sustain themselves, so their revenues would equal their expenditures. So where did we end up? Again, I like to show reports that people are familiar with. So the report you're seeing on your screen right now is one that I share with College Council every year and one that I share with the campus at large every year. It represents our core operating budget. So again, a reminder that the revenues that go into the core operating budget consist of tuition and fees, just the college fee, and state support. So in the beginning of last year, we had set a target for ourselves of $51.5 million in campus-based revenue sources, the tuition and college fee. We also anticipated getting almost $16 million in state support for a total of $67.5 million. We anticipated in the beginning of the year that if we spent everything that was budgeted in all of the accounts, we would spend almost $60 million in personal service, another $5 million in temporary service, $2.5 million in utilities, and $3.8 million on other contracts and equipment and travel. So again, we started out the year anticipating that we were going to have to use $2.9 million worth of reserve to balance our budget. Now let's go to the right side of the page and see where we actually ended up. We actually ended up collecting less than $49 million in tuition revenue, or not less than, but about $49 million in tuition revenue, which was about $2.5 million less than we anticipated in the beginning of the year. So we didn't meet our target. Additionally, COVID came into play and the state was not able to meet its commitment to the campus. And we were only distributed $13.9 million of our $15.9 million anticipated state support. So a $2 million shortfall there, which represents about 13% of our state support was not realized by the campus. So all in all, when you add up our revenues, the campus was short in our revenue target by $4.5 million. However, there's always a little bit of a bright side to the story. Personal service, as you know, for the last couple of years, we've been engaging in what we call strategic recruitment. It means that we've been delaying hires. Whenever a position is vacated, we hold that position vacant for 90 days, and we accrue some one-time savings from holding that position open. And while we hold the position open, we do a deep dive into the work of that position to see if there's a way to reassign duties and whether there's an appropriate level of service that we're getting from that position. And then we, if it's warranted, we will go out and start the search from that point on. So our strategic recruitment efforts, combined with a little bit of COVID effect that we'll talk about in a little while, enabled us to save $2.3 million of the anticipated personnel service in that expenditure line. In the temporary service line, we actually had some savings at the end of the year because we did not hire a bunch of summer hires that we normally do throughout the year. And again, that was mostly a COVID effect. We saved some money in utilities. As you know, most of us transitioned to working from home during the end of March. So we ended up saving some of our utilities in our buildings. And We were also put under a mandate to halt all non-essential spending on campus, which enable us to avoid spending almost $500,000 in supplies and travel and contracts and equipment. So all in all, we didn't spend as much as we thought we would in the beginning of the year, to the tune of $3.1 million. When you match the actual expenditures against the actual revenues in the end of the year, we were short about $4.4 million, which means that we needed to use campus reserve or campus cash balance to balance the budget last year of about $4.4 million. So, as you all are well aware, in the spring of 2020, orders were issued to send college students home, and we were asked to issue refunds for unused rent, food, and fees. So here are the numbers that the campus refunded in the individual buckets. So in the room rent bucket, we issued almost $6 million worth of refunds, which represents about a quarter of the annual revenues in that fund. We issued almost $700,000 worth of athletic fee refunds, $60,000 in course fees, $54,000 in parking fees, and then a bunch of other smaller fees, a lot which were associated with international programs of about $188,000. Our partners in crime, the Student Association and CAS and Food Service, also issued refunds that went through our student accounts office. Student activity fee refunded $112,000 of their funds, and food service more than $2.5 million worth of refunds were issued. So total refunding on campus was $9.7 million. So just want to point out here that activity fee and food service fee may not be campus money, but you know, obviously refunding these impacts the services that are provided to our students. And most importantly, with respect to CAS and the food service funding, what a lot of people aren't aware of is that CAS, through its contracts with Sodexo, the bookstore, and our vending company, secures a lot of funding that is then turned back to the campus in the form of scholarships and in programming funds, which are especially utilized in the Office of Student Affairs to provide services to our students. So I wanted to make that link here, that even though they aren't direct campus funds that were lost due to these refunds, it does have an impact on the services that we offer. All right, so if we take out those purple numbers from the previous slide and we add them to the core operating shortfall, the refunds plus the core operating shortfall meant that our cash balances at the end of last year were reduced by nearly $11.4 million. As a point of reference, our campus cash balance at the beginning of the 1920 fiscal year were $28 million. So we approached nearly half of our cash balances needing to be utilized with COVID and our core operating shortfall. All right, so that was last year. What's happening this year? So far, our fall enrollments are holding pretty steady. We are down about 5% from this time last fall, but given the current circumstances, that is a pretty good place to be. We feared that we could be in a far better or far worse situation than we are now, and so that 5% is not as bad as it could have been. One of the troubling things that we're seeing right now is our fall residence hall occupancy is currently half capacity from where we normally are this time of year. In the beginning of the year, we put out a plan to SUNY system where we were going to limit the occupancy in our residence halls to 2,900 students, so we would have no triples like we usually do because we're a very popular school. But we saw that the students, for various reasons, did not take us up on our offer to house them, and we ended up with only 1,600 students out of our 3,200 capacity. We still don't know what our state support is going to be. We will likely not know until after the election, and I would guess that it's going to be a while after the election that we'll know exactly what our state support is going to be for the year. Our fall fees, those broad-based fees that support the IFR, those are enrollment driven, the broad-based fees are, and to the extent that students are taking certain courses, the course fees are enrollment driven. So since our enrollment's down a little bit, those fees are down a little bit as well. Athletics fee is particularly shorter this semester than it was last fall because we actually reduced the athletic fee due to the fact that we couldn't have any fall sports. That was a SUNY Act decision, and obviously the campus needed to abide by that. So we do not have any intercollegiate athletics programs for the fall. And at the beginning of the semester, we weren't even sure if the Athletic and Wellness Center could open. Fortunately, it could. Students are utilizing it, it's going well, but we did reduce that fee based on the services that the students were going to receive. We also have had no action on tuition increases for our students. We, again, will not know until after the election and then after the Board of Trustees are able to meet after the November elections to know if we will see any increases for the 2021 fiscal year and beyond. On the expenditure side, we are currently under mandate for a hiring freeze. So no positions that are not related to health and safety or to the mission of the campus. So they call them revenue generating, but basically it means faculty positions. If we can't very well teach our students unless we have the faculty to teach them. So unless those position that's vacated is in one of those two realms, it will be put in a deep freeze for a while. We are also under a managed print initiative directive from system administration. This basically means if you don't need to print it, don't. Watch your spending on paper. We are not allowed to buy any more desktop printers, and even when it comes to printing and copying equipment across the campus that may have maintenance agreements, we've been asked to try to mitigate the maintenance agreements to get a shorter time frame while SUNY puts out a request for proposal for a SUNY-wide managed print initiative. So SUNY's trying to get some economies of scale by managing all of the printers and copiers and multifunctional machines that we have on every campus. Campuses are also under a state travel ban. So non-essential travel is curtailed at this point. Not that there's anywhere to go, but we'll adhere to that as long as it's in force. All other non-essential spending has been curtailed as well. So really, if you don't need it to absolutely get the job done this semester, put that purchase aside and save that money. And as you all know, you're well aware, negotiated salary increases have been postponed until at least January 1st of 2020. Now, again, I like to have some good news in my back pocket. I'll take care of the easiest one first. The federal government issued the CARES Act. Our students saw $3.2 million in direct student aid come from the CARES Act. That funding was distributed by our very, very talented staff and dedicated staff in the Office of Financial Aid, and then in student accounts and IT, helping them get the money out the door, and accounting as well played a role in that. So our students are are currently enjoying a little bit of relief of their own, but the campus itself also received a matching grant of $3.2 million. That $3.2 million can help us go back to pay off some of the refunds that we issued to our students. In addition to the $3.2 million, we received a grant of $320,000 thanks to Carrie Cordy and her efforts in drawing that grant down. And the campus can use those supplemental funds also to either help with increased technology needs or to repay the refunds that were issued directly to the students in the spring. The other one, the little bit more complicated one, is that SUNY System Administration went back and took a look at those bonds I spoke about before that are issued for the residence hall rehab and repair, as well as new construction, and they refinanced the entirety of the SUNY related debt. Basically, what this means is they pushed our payments, our debt service payments, down the road and refinanced them for 2 years. The annual spend on debt service for the residence halls for this campus are about $11 million. So if we look up at the top of the slide, what's in orange, the residence hall capacity is currently at about half capacity. Translated into dollars, that's $6 to $7 million that we're not seeing in fall rent. If spring is the same as fall, we'll see another $7 million shortfall in that room rent. So in total, we're losing about $14 million in rent, but we have an $11 million invoice that we're not going to be paying this year or next year. So that is a very key component to our health as an institution financially. All right, so I know that we began this by talking about all funds, and it is important to keep the all funds in the back of our mind, but for a lot of reasons, I can't really graphically portray trends in the all funds sufficiently to get some points across. So I wanted to back up to a slide that we used about a year and a half ago to talk about our core operating fund. So again, our core operating fund is comprised of direct taxpayer support and tuition revenue. Together, those create our revenue or our spending authorization, represented by the orange line above. And then all of our personnel needs and our utilities and supplies and equipment represent our spending need. For several years, from 2012 till about 2016, both of those lines were nicely aligned. That's what a budget officer likes to see, is where your revenues and match your expenditures. And you know, of course, it's always nice to put a little money away, so you want your revenues to actually exceed your expenditures. But we were doing real well during this period of predictable tuition. Then in 2016, tuition was held flat and things started to go awry. Our spending authorization fell below our spending needs, so our revenues were not keeping up with our expenditures. Our expenditures were rising and rising at a rate faster than our revenues were. So we needed to put those lines back together. We came up with a plan to close the gap by doing a combination of things. We wanted to still mitigate our expenditures, so we wanted to hold the line on our expenditures. That's why we were doing the strategic recruitment efforts and really looking at the positions that we had on campus. We were trying to create efficiencies and look to see where we could initiate some cost savings with contracts, you know, renegotiating things, looking to see what we didn't need to spend. And at the same time, we were actively seeking to increase our enrollments through new programs and heightened recruitment efforts. We had a plan that, if it worked, would have brought those lines back together in about 3 years. Then enter COVID. As I stated before, we saw a 13% drop in our state support. All factors are indicating, and we've been told by system administration to factor in about a 25% state support decline this year. So if state support declines by 25%, and if our spring enrollment is like our fall enrollment, all told, we could see potentially a gap in our core operating budget of $10.6 million this year. What's concerning is, again, there's so many unknowns that we don't know how much of that would be a one-time glitch, and how much of that would be an ongoing problem that we need to address. Oops, sorry. So what's next? Again, we don't expect to know anything about state support or tuition levels before the elections. And my guess is that it's going to take the state and SUNY some time after the elections to really understand what campuses will see in the form of state support or possible tuition increases. So there is a likelihood that many of us will transition back to, well, our students will transition back to remote learning, and we will likely not know. This is me speaking, not official speak. I think we won't know until after the Thanksgiving break, at least. So that is a challenge. We also need to keep vigilant about our reduced spending and our hiring freeze. So I appreciate the efforts that are going across campus. I know that the increased requirements we're putting on every expenditure, the enhanced supervisory sign off is a pain to deal with, but we appreciate you all working hard to keep those expenditures low. And obviously we appreciate all the extra work that folks are doing now that they have reduced, some may see reduced numbers of positions in their office. And then there are all the challenges that the pandemic itself has put on us with reimagining everything that we do, and still getting the students through successfully. We also have to keep in mind the interplay between the funds. If we don't fill those residence hall beds, we won't be able to pay the bonds of the future. We have people that are associated with those other funds. So as our residence hall occupancy and enrollments, the healthier that they can be, the healthier the campus will be. And then once we have a clearer picture of the state support and tuition, et cetera, we can determine which shortfalls are one-time in nature and which actions we'll need to take to balance the budgets of the future. As the president mentioned in the beginning, which I missed some of it because of my technical difficulties, we will open this up and engage in consultative and open budget process similar to the ones that we've used before during the 2008 and 9 and then 10, 11 shortfalls. So I've heard more than once that, you know, we always talk about budget shortfalls and we always find our way out of it. And so there might be a little bit of you know, what's different about this year sense out there on the campus. And part of me says, yes, you know, we have come out of all of this because we are smart, we work together, and we come up with really creative ways to manage the budget on this campus. But this year is different for so many reasons. When we had to realign our budget, our core operating budget back during right after the Great Recession, we had some flexibility in our other funds. So in the residence hall, the IFR, and the Sutra Fund, we had a little, I don't want to say fluff, but we had a healthy revenue stream that didn't exactly align properly align the expenditures. We had too many expenditures on the state operating fund that really were associated with the funds that were being collected in those other funds. So basically we shifted expenditure from the core operating budget to those other funds. And now we are in a position, as I mentioned before, where those budgets were expected to maintain their own expenditures, where the revenues and expenditures would meet nicely, so we wouldn't see any excess revenue in those funds. So now all of those budgets were aligned. We don't have that capacity to move any core operating funding around to those budgets. Also in 2010, there was a state-sponsored retirement incentive that led to positions vacated through attrition. We don't think that that's going to happen again this year, but it's not under our control. So we will have to wait and see if another retirement incentive is offered. But for now, we're considering that not to be one of our options. Predictable tuition also began in 2011. So just as we were cutting millions of dollars from our budget, predictable or rational tuition came into play for 5 years. That enabled us to plan and to invest in faculty and staff positions that were sorely needed and may have been lost in the previous years. Not sure that that's going to happen again. And again, for many reasons, we hate to see our students bear the burden of supporting the campus costs. We really like to see a nice balance of state support and tuition with to keep our institution healthy. So we're not sure about any tuition increases. This year also, the anticipated declines in state support are coupled with enrollment and residence hall occupancy declines due to the pandemic. And this is creating a significant problem for at least the short term, and it makes it difficult to ascertain what's a one-time problem versus an ongoing challenge. I'm not sure why that is blank, but oh, look at that, transitions. Annie would be so proud of me. I didn't do this one. I don't know how it got there, but I wanted to remind us of what we control and what we don't control, so that when we move forward to talking about how we're going to manage this budget problem, we know that, what we have a firm grasp on and what we don't. So we control to the degree that the market permits how many students we will admit and enroll. We control, if we're fortunate enough, our admission standards, which are pretty darn high. We've got a lot of smart students. What we don't control, we don't control our collective bargaining. We don't control our tuition rates, our state tax support, and the number of or complexity of unfunded governmental mandates. So that serves as just a reminder, and basically now we can open it up to questions or comments from the group, and I will stop sharing so that we can all see each other's faces. So I think if you use the raise your hand feature or the chat box, we can open it up to questions. And I thought I saw something in the chat, but I can't seem to get it.
It's a question. Does this mean, and it's about the delayed state subsidy payments?
Mm-hmm.
Does it mean that they never happened?
Pretty much, yeah. You know, when we talked about last year something called the magic window, where the state basically gave us an advance payment on our state support. We still anticipated on only collecting 15,994,000 during the fiscal year 2019 to 2020. We only collected the 13 million. So basically, yes, the advance payment didn't happen, and our total collections were reduced by $2 million. Other questions? I know there's got to be a lot. I know this was a lot of information to get in 53 minutes. Like I said, it took me only 30 years to understand what's going on here. So Beth, the reduction in the state subsidy was what I showed on that slide. It's $2 million or 13%.
So that's for last year's academic year budget?
Yes.
Okay. And then we're talking about an additional potential 25% reduction for this year.
For this year, right. How are retention rates looking in terms of student numbers? And I will turn that over to either the president or one of my other cabinet colleagues.
Vice President Eaton, are you in a position to respond to that?
Well, I can respond to what we came into the year with. We came into the year, I don't know if Lucy's on here or not. She might be able to pull this up off the top of her head as well. But I know that we had an upper 80% retention rate for students that entered in fall 2019, and that surprised all of us. I could say this, that the strength of our enrollments this fall, because we were prepared for much more disappointing turnout. The strength of our enrollments this fall were basically the robust return rate of our continuing students. So we were actually ahead coming into the fall with student registrations, particularly at the undergraduate level. I think, and we came close to our targets, but a little under in terms of new student enrollments. Undergraduate enrollment is down by about 4.2%, and then if you include visiting exchange students, which are primarily international, and graduate students, came in a little under, so we're about 5% down in total enrollments. That translates, as Michelle said, that translates into $1 million something loss in revenue. However, it's exacerbated by the fact that the two most difficult populations to recruit were out of state and international. I mean, we actually had a really good international recruiting season, and a lot of people accepted, and even a robust number of deposits at both the undergraduate and graduate level. But they didn't come or couldn't come because they couldn't get the papers that they needed to get here. Many of them are planning to come in the spring, so we hope, knock on wood, that happens.
I see several questions in the chat that are asking us to speculate on actions that we would potentially consider or take, and these are the kinds of things that I alluded to at the beginning, that we really can't assess whether those kinds of steps will be essential until we have a clearer sense of cuts in direct taxpayer support, a potential federal buyout, all of those considerations that are still very much up in the air.
There's a question in there that I'd like to answer. I hear, and this is from Tom Nolan, I hear the number of students who have not made arrangements to pay their tuition is very high, and some students have told us they are waiting to decide if they are going to just drop and not pay. First of all, I have to start by saying that usually we bill in June and then bill immediately when new students register in August, July, June and July principally. This year we didn't bill until the end of the summer for obvious reasons. And so their due date on their bills was like September 28th. And so everything is backed up. We, at one time, were looking at about over 2,000 people who had not processed their payments. As of late, it's down in the 400s. And so that's pretty good progress. That might sound like a lot, but when we have 7,400 students on campus or 7,400 students registered, most of them full-time, and we're only dealing with 400 that haven't made payment arrangements or paid, I think that's a reason to be a little optimistic. And I do not suspect that those students are not going to eventually pay to get their grades and their records.
And I see Lucy Walker has responded that our retention rate of first-year students from last year to this fall is 87%, which is higher than it's been the last couple of years. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say that I am so proud of how resilient our continuing students are, how determined they are to get, to make progress on their degree, and as well as the new students who just jumped into an unknown world and into an environment that is so vastly different than any of their predecessors have experienced. And talking to them and getting feedback from them through various sources, I'm thinking that these are the people that you're going to want to hire 2, 3, 4 years from now when they graduate, because I'll tell you, they're impressive.
So, bunch of questions popping up out here. How likely is it for full-time faculty teaching load that it will increase from 3.4 to 4.4? And also, what other plans or considerations are on the table for how to go about closing the gap? So basically, as I said before, we're already doing some things to mitigate our expenditures, and we just don't know how much of that mitigation is going to be permanent versus just a one-time challenge. So we don't want to make any permanent decisions for a one-time problem, because that would be devastating all across the board. So to some extent, we are still in a holding pattern, waiting for certainty with regard to state support and any possible tuition increases. And we're also taking direction from system administration and the governor's office on particular actions at this point. So a lot is still pending on the November elections and the information that we'll learn after that. But as far as plans to close the gap, again, we're going to open this up to a consultative process. We're going to be utilizing the budget advisory committee. We're meeting in 2 weeks, I believe, to start talking about laying out the process and how they can help foster the process. Those of you who were here back then will remember that we had a WooFoo form, basically an inbox, so to speak, where folks could leave suggestions anonymously online to help us go and look at certain things, cost out, ideas for revenue generation, expenditure reduction. So we'll be looking for all of your best efforts In that regard, if you have suggestions, please forward them, and we'll investigate what that might look like. Anything else, cabinet colleagues?
If I could just add a comment, this is Barbara. I, of course, can only echo what Michelle has said. We don't know yet. We don't know enough to know what particular steps we would take in terms of budget reduction plans that we would go forward with. But yes, we look forward to a consultative process. But what I wanted to say right at this particular moment is that at a time when it almost necessarily feels as if not only is there lots of uncertainty, but there is then that lends to a feeling of having little control, few or fewer ways of having an influencing, affecting, having an impact. But I want to reiterate something that I tried to express in my last report to the faculty, and that is, when I talked about and reminded, in many cases, I was reminding you of those 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. To the extent that in the courses you are teaching right now, we're at the beginning of, what would be the second half of, a normal semester, but anyway, week 8. And we know it's going to end differently because it'll be remote. But to the extent that you already are, or, and will continue, or can add, sometimes the changes can seem small, but can have a large impact. So to the extent that you work towards student-faculty contact, to the extent that you do things in a way that can support students' cooperation and their relationships with each other as course mates, as classmates, to the extent that you use and can encourage the students themselves to use active learning approaches, to the extent that you give prompt feedback, and especially when that feedback is what others have called wise feedback, and then that ties to the other one of communicating high expectations, to the extent that you give the message to students as a whole, to individual students, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high standards and I expect that you can meet them. That helps to the extent that there is appropriate learning time on task structured in, and to the extent that you work to accommodate, the different kinds of students contributions can make because of their differences in background and in talents and ways of learning and so forth. So I just want to affirm that all of those things that you are already doing in those various regards are ways of making a difference and having an impact, even as there's so much uncertainty and so much that we don't control, ergo the sense of often of not having a lot of control. But you are so important, the faculty I'm speaking to right now, our teaching faculty, to students. Everything helps. And the high retention rates that David Eaton was, that question caused us to look at, that high retention rate, that resilience of our students all across this institution. I find from faculty, from staff, there's a commitment to making sure that our students are successful, and people are living that out wherever they are, and even under these trying circumstances. So these are reasons why we have very different student outcomes. It's not just, yes, our student outcomes, we can appreciate the numbers, but I happen to have experience or have experiences that have allowed me to know what student success rates look like at similarly situated institutions, institutions that are strong peers of an institution like New Paltz. And the best of those institutions don't necessarily have our student success rates. So continue your good work. And, we thank you for it. And I know the students do as well.
Thank you, Barbara.
Another question in the chat. How many students will be on campus next semester? We have let me see, 41 days, 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 32 seconds until the students depart for the Thanksgiving break and for the semester. Our every hope is to keep the students here and on campus until then. Our success in the residence halls and keeping our virus numbers down, knock wood, has been great so far. And the further success we can have in that will determine how many students will get back in the spring. Where for budgetary purposes, we basically made spring look like fall, anticipating that a similar number of students will come back. But to the extent that we can safely house more students, we could definitely use that money to float our boat. It will not only help us financially, but as we were talking before, it helps with the student retention. But again, we have to make sure that we can do it safely. And student affairs, whoever's out there, you're rocking it. Trying to go back and see what other stuff we've missed here in the chat. More questions about staffing, and again, we're taking our direction from the state and from our new chancellor. We don't know again what we're going to need to do as far as permanent adjustments to our budget. So we're not going to really speculate on what we have to do until we know what we need to do. And that probably didn't make a lot of sense, but you know what I mean. When we know the number, we able to see, well, what can we do with efficiencies? One of the things that keeps rolling around in my mind is, can we accomplish further savings like we did this summer by having a remote summer? But these are all conversations that are far beyond campus purview to talk about, with negotiated contracts for a lot of our personnel. These are conversations that would happen outside of the campus first and come back. But is that a possibility? We enjoy a lot of savings from our holiday reduction in the number of buildings that we use between December 20th or whatever we normally end the semester and after the new year. We consolidate the number of buildings that we have people work in. A lot of people use time and they're not on campus, and we save on electricity. Is there something to be gained by doing that for summer? It's like I said, we're going to be looking for ideas across the campus to try to mitigate permanent personnel actions that we might have to take. Again, going back to the chat, forgive me while I read. So there's some news coming out of Buffalo State. I haven't read that news, so I don't really want to speculate on that.
I'm not familiar with that news either, and I don't know quite how to frame this. What you're hearing from all of us is a lot of caution in the face of a lot of uncertainty about what it is that we're facing. But if you're hearing optimism here, we're not communicating accurately if you're hearing an optimistic viewpoint from us, Beth. It's just that we don't know and we don't want to cause wild speculation about matters that we don't know about yet.
I understand that, Don. I just offered this state thing as, it's another SUNY comprehensive that's grappling with basically a lot of the same issues that we have come up with, what their president is talking about is honestly kind of frightening to me. I very much appreciate, it's not so much that you're being optimistic, but hearing Michelle repeatedly say, we want to look carefully to make sure something's not just like that we don't want to make permanent changes when it's like a one-time situation and so on, which again, I think we all very much appreciate. So, but again, just for people's information so that they can understand what's going on across the system. That was the intent of sharing that.
Sure. And, I would share also that I know another one of our comprehensive sector campuses has already made the decision to move to 3-4 or 4-4 teaching loads from 3-3.
Yes, we've
so
been doing that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the dynamics here that I think I can speak about, and I'll share this in the context of a conversation that I had with faculty at a budget forum probably in spring of 2019, and it was on the heels of a citizen having written a letter to one of the local dailies about how awful things were at SUNY and how the funding was going down the tubes, quality was falling. And I raised the question with this small group of faculty, if you're a parent of a high school student looking at colleges, how do you view a message like this? So, because so much of our revenue is contingent on strong enrollment, we want to be careful in our messaging that we don't convey that we're a dying institution or a failing institution, because that does not serve our mission. It doesn't serve any of us well. And so that's also part of the dynamic that we navigate in how we speak and how we write about the budget challenges that we face.
And also, I'll just share that, different campuses across the system were in different predicaments before COVID. What Buff State was seeing prior to COVID was put them in a less advantageous financial position than perhaps we were in. Paul Chevet notes that perhaps it's our enrollments not being down as much as other campuses. That is true. Actually, the university centers are reporting that their enrollments are pretty steady, but enrollments headcount is different from revenue. So to the extent that we can't recruit our international students, we're not getting the out-of-state students, that impacts our revenue more than a headcount does. So campuses are seeing that all across the state. Many of the comprehensive campuses are in a similar, if not the same boat as New Paltz, seeing a decline, a single-digit decline in the percentage of enrollments. But again, the international population is weighing heavy on our revenue pieces. But yeah, I want to speak a little bit about our financial position going into this. Now we know we had a little bit, we had a $3 million shortfall in the state operating budget of last year. But we had some pretty healthy reserves over the past few years. That helps us. One of the places that we had a really nice reserve was in the residence hall fund. And we had that reserve on purpose. That reserve was meant to help us not have to issue bonds for some bigger renovations that were going to be taking place down the road. We actually do a 10-year budget outlook for our residence halls every year. And facilities and Julie Walsh and student affairs put their heads together and try to, get their SWAMI on and predict the future for the next 10 years. What are we going to renovate? What are we going to tear down? What are we going to build new? And plot that all out in a way that is affordable for our students. And to give them the services that they expect and want from a college campus. So we built in a little bit of a reserve so that we wouldn't have to issue bonds and increase their room rents further, and we could handle a bathroom renovation in Boughton Hall on campus cash rather than on bonds. So when COVID hit, we actually had a reserve that was big enough so that our bank account didn't go in the red when we issued those refunds. And some campuses didn't have that. And while other campuses actually are in a better financial position than us. So a lot of what you're seeing out there in the news for other campuses is likely due to the predicament they were already in prior to COVID. That's not to say that I'm optimistic. Don't read that in there. Any
Other questions forthcoming? Mike, any hands raised?
Nope, there are no hands raised.
Well, as always, my email inbox is always open. It gets emails at all times of day because some of you people just don't know how to turn it off at night. But please, if you have any questions, I'm always available. And again, we will be reaching out and talking with the Budget Advisory Committee. We'll make a plan for inviting ideas, but please don't wait for the invitation. If you have an idea, shoot it my way, hallsteam@newpaltz.edu. And once we know more, we'll absolutely communicate it. We'll probably come back together and talk about this. It's not going to go away anytime soon. This is going to be a multi-year problem that we have to face. We're not alone. And we offer a good product. So that in that respect, I am optimistic because I don't think the students want SUNY New Paltz to go away anytime soon.
I have a slightly related question. I don't know if it's too cynical, but as we get through the semester with such low COVID numbers, my fingers are crossed, don't strike lightning down on us, will students be more looking at New Paltz saying, you know what, New Paltz has done things correctly. They're safe. Look at New Paltz, and maybe even going more on campus. We're doing really good so far.
Yeah, in that respect, we are. Our students, faculty, and staff are very well behaved.
Well, and I think that will be an asset in what our spring semester will look like in beyond. We know that lots of students and parents made decisions to study remotely, primarily out of health concerns, the concern about being on a college campus. And I always want to knock on wood when I say this. We have done so well, and I think that may give some parents and students greater reassurance that it will be safe to come back to campus at New Paltz than if we were at campus X, Y, or Z that I won't name. So we're hopeful that is noticed.
Anything else?
Okay.
All right. Thanks all. Be well.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe, be well.